Wow, I am just overwhelmed to be with such an amazing group of people and so talented and giving. And I think that the Rotary Club, their merging of innovation and humanity and engineering and technology is just what we need at this time in the world. So I am really, really humbled. I just was an infectious disease doc that wanted to go to Africa. So in 20 years ago, 25 years ago now, the AIDS epidemic was, of course, raging through the United States and around the world. And I met a man named Phil Simon. And Phil was an ordinary guy. He was from Glendale, and he had HIV. But he had an extraordinary heart. And as some of you might remember, in those days, HIV patients were very much stigmatized. They lost their jobs, they lost their insurance, they lost their families. Many people had no one at their bedside when they were dying from a devastating disease. We had no treatment at the time. And Phil, who had HIV himself, would spend many times in the hospital going down to rooms of patients and being there and holding their hand as they passed away and reaching out to them, even though he knew he was going to follow in their footsteps. Phil died in 1995, or 1996, and about a month later, the protease inhibitors were released, which really changed the course of HIV and, of course, have now made it a very treatable and manageable disease. And so when we had an HIV clinic at Huntington, we decided to name it after Phil. He actually never gave a dime to the hospital, but his heart and his compassion was so amazing that it was very appropriate that we named the clinic after him. I had an extraordinary collection of volunteer people, social workers, nurses, nutritionists, and who were very devoted to taking care of patients there at the time. And in 2000, I asked them if they'd like to think about doing a project in sub-Saharan Africa. HIV was raging throughout Africa, and Africa really has borne most of the brunt of this disease from the beginning of the HIV epidemic. So we went to Tanzania in 2002, and at that time when you'd go into an African hospital, I know some of the doctors here have been to Arusha. At Mount Meru Hospital, for example, you would walk in and there would be 4 or 5 people in a bed, most of whom were dying from HIV. There was very few people to take care of them, very few healthcare workers. Many of them had died of HIV themselves. So it was really a pretty devastating time, but we had social workers with us and we ran some support groups and began to start our work there. And of course, over the ensuing years, the antiretroviral therapy became available in sub-Saharan Africa. And over the years, as we've traveled back, we've seen an incredible change in the number of people that are benefiting from antiretrovirals and are now living very productive, long lives and are doing very well, giving back to their community. So it's really been an extraordinary journey that started with HIV. We now have a project that encompasses both medical and surgical care. We do cleft palate and cleft lip repairs and all kinds of orthopedic repairs. We have an amazing social work and home-based care program. We do a lot of infrastructure, and we now have veterinarians going with us. And I was just telling Marie about a plan we're having for our next trip starting in February. The veterinarians are going to do a 500 spay and neuter clinic of cats and dogs in Arusha, which will prevent 40,000 strays from appearing on the streets that can carry rabies and so forth. I was moved by Dr. Patzert's speech because I think that what he said was very relevant. This is a time when science is a little bit under siege, and I think it's so important to be a voice for science and the marriage of science and compassion and humanity, and I hope that I applaud the Rotary Club for doing that, and I hope that all of us can continue to pull those pieces together. The Africans have really faced an enormous amount of adversity and challenges over the last many, many years. Global warming is certainly a very big part of what's happening in sub-Saharan Africa. When you go out on the Serengeti, the wildebeest are now actually moving up into the much higher elevations because they can't find grazing grounds in the lower elevations, their normal routes of migration. We're seeing a lot more malaria in areas of sub-Saharan Africa where we never saw it before, very high elevation areas around the Ngorongoro area that in affecting populations that don't have much immunity to falciparum malaria. So climate is really driving a lot of problems. Certainly a lot of the migrations of people right now, whether it's in sub-Saharan Africa or in Southeast Asia, are being driven by drought and lack of resources and so forth. So it really has an impact on infectious diseases and general health. That said, the Africans, I think, have really faced a lot of these adversities with incredible courage and compassion, and we've learned so much from them as we've worked over there. I think we get so much more from the Tanzanians than we probably ever give to them. I think in the Western culture we often value the words of Descartes, which was, I think, therefore I am. The Africans are much more into collective community, and their motto was really, I am because you are. So with that, I would like to thank you very much, and I'm very honored to receive this award.